I want to talk today about narcissism, and that's not why it's dark and why I'm determined to put a video out. I want to talk about it, narcissism, and how it has become a crazy, widespread phenomenon, and how it's everywhere. And it's also just exploded out of nowhere. Like, when did it all when did narcissism hit the mainstream? So I'm really fascinated by this topic. Actually, a few years ago, I was obsessed with it as a topic. I really wanted to learn as much as I could about it. And it really drew a lot of attention to, well, a lot of unexplainable things that were now explainable. I think everyone has been exposed to very toxic behaviors in people, and they can be confusing. And it's really helpful to know, like, that you're not alone, and that it's a kind of a common thing, and that also that I found very empowering about learning about narcissism was that the person's unlikely to change. That you are believing to be a narcissist or narcissistic, and that gave me a lot of sort of power to be less reactive, and also to step away and not take things as personal as well. And so I think it's amazing to learn about psychological conditions and behavior traits and personality types, and those things are really helpful to learn as a theory, and in practice it's really helpful as well. Like, it can create a lot of peace in some sense to get answers and to be proactive in dealing with problems that you now learn about. So basically, if you learn about narcissism and you realize you are like always in a dynamic with a narcissist, you, by learning about it, can step away from it or change the way you address it, and that is healthy. Well, I don't know, I'm not the person to assign healthy and unhealthy, I suppose, but it's empowering. It gives you power in a situation where you've probably felt pretty powerless. But in strength of this channel, and what I'm trying to achieve here, is I want to actually look at it from a really balanced point of view and address the zeitgeist. Like, everyone's a narcissist now. Everyone's like, if someone is a little bit toxic, or is aggressive, a little bit aggressive, or I mean totally aggressive as well, or is really rude, or just a bit of a dick, they're now a narcissist. Everyone's a narcissist. I think I hear people referencing narcissism that I would never have even considered to reference narcissism. And I've heard people referencing narcissism about people that I'm like, I don't know. I don't think that's that. Then they're that narcissistic, or like, I don't necessarily feel like the complaints about them is enough to tarnish someone with the narcissist brush. And there's implications of that. It's really reputation damaging to tell someone to tell people that someone's a narcissist. And it was also it's a bit narcissistic to call someone names, right? Essentially, calling someone a narcissist is offensive. It is an insult. It's not a nice thing. So if you're calling someone narcissistic, or you're calling someone a narcissist, that in itself is a narcissistic behavior. And I'm not victim blaming. I'm not saying like you've been on the receiving end of narcissistic abuse for years, and now you've just realized what it is, and you identify that this person is a narcissist, and that you're now you're now in this abusive situation that you need to escape from. I'm not saying that you are therefore a narcissist for saying that. Actually, for a long time, I really questioned whether I was a narcissist, because I had quite toxic behaviors. And looking into it a lot, I've kind of been reassured that it's reflection isn't narcissistic. So by virtue of me reflecting and wondering if I'm narcissistic, and being genuine in it. I think not like, I wonder if narcissists, some people, like some narcissists can know that they're narcissists and not care, and not have like a sort of genuine curiosity about why they're like that or care why they're like that. Whereas when I, exhibited toxic behaviors, and, I probably still do, I reflect and I'm like, God, that was not very nice. And I can see narcissism in my own behaviors. And there's been points in my life where that is being wielded against me as a weapon. The fact that I am quite empathetic, quite compassionate, and I'm also quite flexible in how I think. And so I remember the first time I'd really even heard the term narcissist. It was because I was dating this guy who pretty much bullied me. Like, he was really, really nasty to me, very verbally abusive, emotionally abusive, tried to take advantage of my finances, tried to triangulate me by calling my mum and trying to get my mum against me. And he gaslit me. And one of the things he did was to say to me, basically to accuse me of being abusive, and to like sort of say, just to really let me know how done him wrong. And they were like, he did this to me a few times, and he did it in this gaslighting way where he was like, he said, you said this. And I was like, I didn't say that. And he's like, yes, you did. You said this, X, Y, Z. And I was like, God, if I said that, that's horrible. Like, well, yeah, no wonder he's so upset. I don't remember saying that, but yeah, I can completely get why someone would be upset from me saying that. And all his other behaviors were terrible anyway. And the reason I heard the term narcissism used in that way was I remember talking to my friend about him, and she's like, he's a narcissist. And I thought then of that story, like Narcissus, of someone who's very vain. It's interesting, actually, because then the guy I dated after him was so lovely, like just the nicest guy in the world. And he questioned whether, he said, oh, I can be quite narcissistic sometimes. I was like, no, like, no, you can't, which is, it's the irony, isn't it? It's like someone who is very kind-hearted and very nice and genuine, they can recognize narcissistic behaviors in themselves. Anyway, so that was the first time I'd heard narcissism. Actually, in both of those instances, with one guy after the other, they were I dated them in quite close succession, which is, again, a narcissistic trait, to sort of jump from relationship to relationship, which I kind of did and I have done for a long time. We can get into dating some other time. But yeah, so this person sort of would say that I said something that I didn't think I said. And because he did that a few times to me, I started almost tracking, like I would almost like remember specifically like something I said. I can't remember how I did it, but I just remember one day he said, you said this, you said this, or he accused me of something. I was like, categorically didn't do it. Like, I knew that I didn't do it. And so I knew, I was like, okay, you are tricking, you're saying things to get control over me, because he obviously saw that when he accused me of those things, I'd kind of like back down, or I would like, I'd like soften, or I'd be like, I'd reflect and I would take blame, I'd take ownership of that. And so, with some, when I started paying attention, I saw that he did that. And then obviously the other dominoes fell. I was like, so there's other times he must have been like doing that as well. And that, I remember, this was before I knew much about narcissism, but I remember like that was one of the things where I was like, oh, there's no, like, this is like a no-win situation. Like, this is a situation like I can't win in. Like, I got like, I've always tried to be diplomatic, and I've always tried to like be communicative if I can. But when someone does that, it's like, oh yeah, I can't, there's nothing I can do there, because you're actually rejecting my diplomacy. You're refusing constructive conversation so that you can win. Like, that's what it was. And I remember like the time like I really tested it was that like I kind of just was like, okay, well, I'm just going to let him I'm gonna let him let rip. So we went for this long walk because it was very volatile. It was very up and down, and this was a very short relationship as well. Like this all happened in like 6 weeks, which again, you like, was this between 6 weeks and 3 months? Like we were already on and off in that stage. And I genuinely think that's because I was a bit of like, I was like, I used to defend myself. I wasn't very easily led in a sense, but easily led enough that he stayed interested for, up to 3 months. And I was like, I wanted to sort things out, or, I was whatever. And we went for this walk. And so I was like, I just asked him, like, what's going on for him. And he basically let it rip. Like, he was like, told me everything that I'd done that had upset him, and da 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 da. And I was like, okay, yeah, fair enough. Right. And so I was like, I took accountability for all of that. I could feel he completely like softened as well. And he became very affectionate, and he became very warm, and he became very like, I don't know, he just became very open, and he just seemed really nice. And I was like, oh, this is okay. Okay. So maybe he just needs to vent. Maybe he needs to talk through what he's going through, yada, yada, yada. And I was like, okay. And so I took accountability for everything. I was like, okay, so here's how I feel. And I told him how I felt. And whoa, change was like instant. Like it was, yeah, it was like he just was then really like vile, basically. Like then he was like just completely broke off me. Yeah, again, it was just not a reciprocated thing. And so for me, that was like the final straw, because I was like, right, okay, so you just want a punch bag. You don't actually want to enter into a reciprocal conversation and take any accountability for it. And I remember we'd gone for a long walk, and we were then walking back to the car, and he was just like being really abusive. Like he was calling me names. He was like, it was like scorn. Like he had this like venom, and I was like, I'd done the worst thing to him ever. It was atrocious. I was the worst person. I was pathetic. I was all these things. And I was like, at that point, I was like, okay, cool. Yeah. Like at that point, it was like water off a duck's back. Like taking, I wasn't taking it to heart anymore, because he was lying as well. And he was like, he was using things against me that didn't happen, and making stuff up. And it was like, I saw it with a much clearer vision. Um, and so that was the first time. And I, look back and think, yeah, I do kind of think he fits the bill for a narcissist, from start to finish. I mean, I don't know very well. I wasn't with him that long, but it was at least a style of abuse that's narcissistic, because he gaslit. He was just abusive. He didn't show any accountability. He didn't really have any empathy for me. And I think he also lost interest in me when I was like, oh, whatever. Like when I was like he didn't pursue me or anything like that afterwards. He didn't try, like, that was that. He was like done with me as well, with that interaction happened. And I was done with him as well, obviously. But I mean, I was lucky. Some people don't feel that way. So I think he got bored of me as well. So it really felt like, he was a narcissist. But the next guy I dated actually thought he was narcissistic, and I didn't know. I found him very reassuring, very kind, very compassionate, just a really nice guy. And obviously he then reflected. And I was like, I can see how someone being called narcissistic can actually weaken them and make them vulnerable to narcissistic abuse. Like, I think that's like that's a real dynamic that's at risk there, and at real play. And so what you end up having is, well, I mean, anyone who's been hurt feels a bit disgruntled. So anyone could call anyone narcissistic, and lots of people take that on the chin who aren't narcissistic, and it gives fuel to people who are narcissistic. And it's calling someone a narcissist is kind of a narcissistic trait, because it's not a nice thing to say. So me calling this guy a narcissist, I mean, I consider him narcissistic. Maybe that's a narcissistic thing to do. I wouldn't call him a narcissist to his face, and maybe me talking about him behind his back is narcissistic. But you get what I mean. There's a lot of like grey area in sort of shitty behavior, and there's grey area in assertive behavior. And so I just wanted to talk about that, because there's two sides, isn't there? And that's important. And I know from recently that one of my friends has someone close to them who is being branded as a narcissist. Their partner has been scorned and is putting all over social media that they are a victim of narcissistic abuse, and that they've broken free from narcissistic abuse. And I know the person in question, and there are some traits that I wouldn't want in a partner, let's just put it that way. But I also feel like there's genuine caring person there. And so that's really, that in itself really gave me like this interesting perspective, because I was like, oh, I see so many social media posts where someone is saying, I've survived narcissistic abuse and I left a narcissistic relationship and, you know, XYZ. And it's made me go, oh, like I always automatically assume that's true. But now I'm like, it's not that I question whether it's true, like whether they're being truthful or not. I question whether it's the term is so widely used that it's now we tarnish it with anyone, and maybe it's misunderstood as well, so that it's not actually representative of narcissistic people or a narcissist. You know, doesn't mean to say they didn't endure abuse or didn't endure narcissistic behavior, but I question now more whether or not this person talking about escaping a narcissistic relationship is true. And again, that's a bit dangerous from the perspective of victims, right? Like, because this word has gone so broad and so wide and is now, you know, cast on so many people that are genuinely victims of narcissistic abuse are really getting drowned out, I think. Maybe it's way more widespread than I anticipate. I don't know. You know, to some extent, I'd say that I'm a victim of narcissistic abuse. I've definitely been that from many, not just one direction, but from other directions. And like, I'm not even like, I feel like a lot of people probably are. A lot of people are probably victims of narcissistic abuse. And it's tragic. I just wonder, I wonder what that's doing to the people that are being accused. And also, it's also, I think, gives the opportunity to not fix problems, right? So when I figured out this guy that I couldn't fix, I couldn't resolve anything with him. Like, there was no resolution for this, whatever it was. If we had an argument, there was no resolution. I was never going to get an apology. I was never going to get an admittance of wrong. Like, not that it, like, it, you know, two sides to every story. I'm happy to, you know, I'm not saying that he was in the wrong, but to resolve, you need to have both parties sort of come together and admit the defects that showed up on their side. And that's very hard to do, and it's a very vulnerable thing to do. And I know that some of my healthiest dynamics and some of my healthiest relationships have made me feel resentment at times, have made me feel bitter at times, have made me think, like, what are you behaving like that for? It's really toxic. It's really bad. Like, it's not okay for you to act like this or speak like this. And it, you know, it makes me think of them as kind of abusive in a particular way. But then having, like, when you get into it with someone and you go with an open heart and you're like, all right, let's hash this out. At the end of it, you're like, oh yeah, that was me. That was like me thinking that about you made me react this way to you, which then made you feel defensive and made you think this way about me, which made you react this way to me. And we've both taken, I've taken your behavior personally when it actually didn't mean the thing I thought it meant. And you've taken my behavior personally, which actually didn't mean the thing that you thought it meant. And we've ended up clashing. And then we've ended up both thinking each other are big fat twats. Like, we're like, you are a wanker. I don't like you, you're toxic, you're narcissistic. But in that reconciliation process, you go, oh God, yeah, that was me. Like I was bringing that perspective in, which tarnished everything. And the same from the other side. They like when you both come in and see, like, oh yeah, like I was actually in a bit of an illusion or delusion about what was going on, and I was tarnishing you with this brush, which was what hit my reaction button. And then because that's hit my reaction button, you know, I see black, I see red, and then it's like nothing you can do is right. And if you imagine you can get to that point with someone, and you can get that point so many times with someone, but never ever like pull everything apart and then see it for what it is, and then realize that you're imagining something that is causing the problem here. You can do that so many times. And what you're going to do is eventually be like, well, this person just doesn't change. Like they have no consideration for me. I've told them multiple times that this behavior upsets me. Da, da, da. We end up having this argument so many times and it's not getting fixed. And then I hear, oh, narcissism, narcissistic people, they don't change. They can't see, you know, they're delusional. They can't see what they're doing, or they're manipulative. They're gaslighting you. And you go, oh, I'm being manipulated, I'm being gaslit. They're actually like abusive. And me entering into this argument with them is just me feeding this fuel that they need. And I'm just, you know, I'm fanning the flames of their narcissism. So now I'm going to break up with them. And I'm also I'm going to smear them and tell the world, because I need to protect the world. Like this is a bad person. This is someone who is abusive and narcissistic and negligent and mean and all the things. They're a really bad person. And so now I actually don't even feel any remorse for talking shit about them. I'm going to now tell everyone on my social media, and I'm going to, you know, reveal who they are. And you, like, I'm not saying that's the case for every time, but you can see how that happens. Like you can see, like when you get into an argument and then you fix it, you're like, oh yeah, what was I thinking? Right, that happens to me all the time. Like every time actually I have an argument, it's very frustrating because I'm like, oh damn, I'm in the wrong in that way, you know. And I have the good fortune to have people in my life who also take credit and accountability for their wrongdoing. And so it's always a healing process. Very hard, very painful, because I don't like to admit I'm wrong, but it happens. If I didn't have that, I would think forever that they were abusive. Basically, I would think forever that they were not a good person, and I wouldn't want to be in contact with them, and I would probably feel a duty to expose them for what they are. And you think, right, they would be in the exact same position to do the same to me, because we've never made that reconciliation happen, right? If there's someone with empathy and compassion and can feel you and care for you, then you can have that reconciliation in theory. And if they can't get that reconciliation with you, they're going to make the same conclusion, right? Like maybe they'll hear about narcissism, and where you can't get out of your own sort of like framework of like where they're in the wrong, and you can't see through that, they can then tarnish you with that same brush and be like, you're a narcissist. And then they go and put online, oh, this person's a narcissist. You think, like, for me, that would hurt me so much, because I'd be like I would feel very like disempowered. Like, so for instance, this guy that I dated, you know, he was obviously calling me names and saying that I was behaving in these ways. And I don't think I'm perfect. And sometimes I like really lost my temper with him, which is narcissistic, obviously. Like sometimes I'd shout because I was so wound up, and I had more of a temper then. And so that is narcissistic in its way. But I felt very much like trying. I was like, I've got a good heart, I'm really trying here, and all you're seeing is the bad. And it made me feel so defeated and so deflated, because I was trying to fix things, and I was trying to make the situation better, but getting nowhere, and seeming to cause more harm, or seeming to keep hurting him. I kept trying to figure out a way to make things better, but it kept sort of like not working. And so then when he'd say, oh, I did all these horrible things, I was like, oh my God, like I'm really doing my best here. And so then if he was to then smear me, because he did a 100% think that I was the abusive party. Like I believe that he thought I was really abusive, and in ways I was, because I did lose my temper with him. And I recognize some sort of narcissistic traits, but you know, I kind of think like, on balance, I had the compassion and empathy that I never saw in him ever. But he had that belief that it was me that was the problem, and he could have then smeared me, and he could have then you know, put stuff out there about me. And so I try and be more like discerning. And one thing I always do is I try and talk about specifics. Like narcissism is just a label, and you could kind of put it on everyone, but can you specify the behaviors or the incidences, right? Like can you and not just a opinion, right? Like if you add layer to it, if you add, well, they made me feel like this, it's you adding a layer on top of it, right? Like you can't add that layer. You can say they said to me that I ignored their phone calls when I didn't. Like I didn't ignore their phone call. I was like changing a baby and I couldn't answer the phone, and so when they rang it didn't go through, and so I, you know, rang them back when I had the free time. And they would say, she always ignores my calls, right? So that analysis on top is their interpretation of of ill will. It's their interpretation of you doing something wrong. But if they said instead, I rang her and she did not answer, and then 15 minutes later, she rang me back and said she was changing the baby or doing whatever, rang me back at the nearest convenience. Like you, or even if you just said, I rang her, it didn't go through, there's no analysis on that. That's the truth of what happened. If you go, oh, I rang this person, it didn't go through. If you say, oh, they ignored me, they rejected me, they were abusive to me, right? Like instead of saying they shouted, get out to me, there's labels that you can put on things, interpretations that you can put on things which discredit it basically. And so I try and pay more attention to specifics, because that's where you can take the label out of it at that point. What, like, you know, at that stage, if you say someone calls you and shouts at you because you didn't answer the phone to them because you were changing the baby, or you were, you know, maybe you had no signal or whatever, and this person shouts at you because of that, why does it matter whether you label them as a narcissist or not? You say that just is not an acceptable way to treat me, and as far as I'm concerned, I don't care whether they're a narcissist, I don't care whether they're an empath. If they continuously treat me this way, it's a no-go for me. And so I try and stay away from those labels. So yeah, that's my, I guess, insight into narcissism, a bit of my experience with it, and just my sort of diplomatic way of thinking about it, that maybe opens up some new ways to think about it, maybe to help people not get sucked in, to not assume narcissism where narcissism might not be. It's quite extreme. And yeah, I guess there's loads more to talk about on this topic. Like, where did it even come from? I'm always very suspicious of like new things, right? Like I tend to be a bit conspiratorial when it comes to like media and trends. I'm like, who's making this trend? What's the benefit to someone? And so I'll definitely get into that, because there's all that sort of stuff around. How did things make it into the zeitgeist? How did things become like mainstream? Like what benefit? Like I always think the media is dodgy, right? The people in power, I don't know, I just think they're dodgy. And to an extent, they can kind of control what it is that we see and what gains popularity, and you know, they control the narrative things. And so if narcissism has been brought into the narrative, like some things are just, you know, just accidental, right? But some things I think are brought in for a reason to keep people, you know, like what would be the benefit for a bad actor who's got control over the media to implement the word narcissist into our everyday language? Like, you know, it justifies people being separate. It justifies arguments. Like, I think it's just it justifies divisiveness. And it's really hard to talk about that, because I don't want to undermine the fact that narcissistic abuse happens. People deserve like justice and deserve to be treated well. But sometimes it can fuel the hate machine. can't it? And so, yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Gosh, my camera's terrible. So sorry, it's all fuzzy. Hope it wasn't too distracting.